Hi, I'm Jay West, and our show is Directions. And Directions is all about talking to people who have had directional changes in their lives, and whether that be a significant change that was intentional or something that just happened in life to them. And so we have fun talking to different people about how those directional changes affected their lives as they made the decisions. And my special guest today is Congressman General Don Bacon. Personal
Jay,
friend.
good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me.
So give us some history of stuff I don't even know. Tell us about your upbringing a little bit, and where you went to college, degrees, whatever you did before pre-military.
Okay. Well, I was raised on a farm in rural Illinois, right on the Indiana border, about an hour and a half south of Chicago, hour north of Champaign. So I worked on the farm since I remember.
Spent the night last week in Champaign-Urbana, so I was close by.
About an hour south of where I was raised. Corn and soybeans, beef cattle on our farm. My grandparents had a house on our farm.
Okay.
We had a house, obviously. My uncle, who was a farmer, had a house in there. My aunt, she was single. She had a house. We had 4 houses on this farm.
Really?
And but I worked. My dad was.
Now you're only dealing with 2 houses.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yes. But my dad, he was a CPA, and so he didn't work the farm. But I was the oldest grandson, for the most part, and so I worked the farm since I remember. I was scooping manure, baling hay. It was my life until I joined the military at 21.
And you're still scooping manure, don't you?
Yes, it is. So it's a good experience for DC.
Yeah.
But I graduated high school at 16, and I went to college, and I was a dishwasher for 4 years.
Now, how did you graduate at 16? Were you just that smart, or how?
I wouldn't say I'm smart, but my dad pushed me. Here's my dad. Don, I expect you to graduate from high school in 3 years. In the summer, I expect you to work 2 jobs. During school, I expect you to work 1 job. I expect you to graduate from college in 4 years. That's my dad. That's what he was, and I did it. And I was one of 9 kids. I was the oldest, and I think the only one that did that.
Set the example.
So, but when I went to college, I was a dishwasher for 4 years, and I graduated at 20.
Where'd you go to college?
Northern Illinois, DeKalb, and I was very focused on what the costs. I mean, I picked schools primarily on the cost of tuition. So I picked
And what was your major?
Political science and history. I was a history minor, and my story on that was I didn't think you could make money on it, so I tried to be accounting. My dad's an accountant. I tried business, computers, pre-law, and I liked nothing except for I liked political science and history. That was fun. But the other classes I found they were torturous. I didn't want to do it. So God made me to like politics.
I had
and
a lot of classes in college I didn't like, so I get it. So.
Yes, I think you got to go where your passion's at. And I love politics. I like military history, and so I just ended up giving into what I liked. When I graduated at 20, I worked for a congressman for a short bit, an intern. His name was Ed Madigan from Illinois. He ended up being beat by Newt Gingrich for leadership down the road. But I went back home and I said, I'm going to probably join the military. So I put my application in. While I was waiting, I was working odd jobs, like I was working in a tire factory, still working on the farm. But I joined the Air Force at 21.
So let's back up. What did your dad think about you leaving the farm, joining the Air Force?
I think he was all right with it. I was probably not meant to be the farm, but I really worked for my uncle who did run the farm. My dad was an accountant. But I think they knew I liked military things. It sort of made sense that I would join the military. I studied it.
I want to put another question in the dimension. Did you have a walk of faith in those days?
Yeah, I became a Christian at 13. I remember praying. I heard from a young boy, believe in Jesus and, ask Jesus in your heart, your sins will be forgiven. And I could quote all that stuff, John 3:16, Romans 10:3 or 10:13.
10 something, yeah.
Yes, whatever, 10 something.
10:4.
Yes. Anyway, my point being is, I started doing it, but one day I was 13, I was in my room, and I was just thinking about it. It dawned on me that, I'm a sinner, and Jesus paid the price for my sins, but I got to follow him, believe in him, ask for forgiveness. And all those words I had, suddenly it made sense what they meant.
So you did this on your own, not with a pastor or something?
Yeah, did it on my own.
Wow. It doesn't often happen that way for people.
It was weird. I've heard the phrases a lot, but one day all of a sudden it dawned on me what it meant. What the words suddenly had meaning to me.
It did that way sort of for me. I did it in my bedroom too, but it was just after watching Billy Graham on TV. So
okay.
Yeah. So what year was this?
I was 13, so 1976.
Okay.
For me though, I took maybe a little bit of a bad turn. My mom and dad got a divorce shortly after that, and here's my perspective: 2 Christians who couldn't figure out how to love and forgive each other, and they were very angry. So the police were over a lot. They were mistreating each other. And I'm like, here's 2 people who call themselves Christian acting that way. and it bothered me. And then after they got divorced, I stayed with my dad, my other brothers, sisters that were alive at that point. Some of them weren't born. Went with my mom. But I was watching them both, and I was like, I find folks aren't being, they say one thing, they're doing another. And I think that sort of defined me for a while. And then my dad remarried, and she was mentally ill. And so I had a violent lady now in my life that was not good to live with. And so I was raised a little bit of, I see people saying one thing and doing another.
Right.
And I also got raised with a little bit of resentment, like, why did you guys put me through this? And why should I let this woman off the hook because she's so violent? So I had to learn about forgiveness later in my life. And that's, I think my biggest challenge when I was younger, I learned how not to forgive and hold a grudge. That's not helpful.
Yeah. Unforgiveness is a killer.
Yep.
I mean,
you're
thinking the other person is suffering, but they're not. You are.
Right. And it's not helpful to have unforgiveness, and you get married. And then you got to learn. And I had these things like, if you cross me too many times, you're done. Well, it doesn't work in marriage, right? And so I had to learn how to forgive. God had to teach me what that really meant, and I learned it through my marriage.
So you joined the Air Force. Basic training was
1985, 21 years old when I joined, and I went through basic 90-day officer school because I had a degree already.
Okay.
I graduated #1 in my class in demerits.
What does that mean?
I had most demerits, anybody in my class. So out of 250, I was the worst. And I
barely. Never in your class. There were only 3, but you were number 1.
No, it was 250, and I was the worst for demerits. And
where did that graduate school? I mean, where did that?
It was down in San Antonio.
Okay.
I was.
Where at? Lackland Air.
It was attached to Lackland Air Force Base. It was an annex called Medina Annex. Now it's an intelligence.
There's another
area.
base there. What's the other base?
Oh, you got Randolph.
Randolph. My dad was at Randolph, though.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been to Randolph a lot. Here's my first day. Just give you an example. O.T. Bacon. I go, yes. It's yes, sir, or no, sir. I go, okay. So I had to learn how to be a military guy. Yeah. I knew the history, but I didn't have any military preparation for making beds, ironing your clothes, controlling my mouth. So I had to learn a lot.
But paid off in the long run.
Yeah, I think you have an inner voice, and I learned how to have an inner voice at OTS. You don't have to blurt out whatever you're thinking.
So where did you serve for a while? Give us a little history.
I had 16 assignments. My next assignment was in Denver, Colorado, Lowry Air Force Base, Intel School. We had about 40 in our class, and I actually did graduate #1 in my class out of that. So I really applied myself, worked hard, and I got stationed at Offutt after that.
Excuse me.
And so I was at SAC headquarters for a while, and I was briefing the 4-star general on morning intelligence briefings. And then I went to Philippines, where I had to work in a F-4 fighter squadron. Then I went through navigator and flight school, and I became an electronic warfare officer. I was stationed then and I did that at Sacramento. I went to Tucson flying EC-130s, and I did that for a total of 11 years.
No idea what that is.
It's a jamming platform, electronic warfare. We jam radars, jam communications. We try to confuse the enemy. And so I started out as a captain.
I was going to say, so you're moving up in rank now too, right?
Started as a captain. I came back later as a lieutenant colonel, then came back as a colonel on that platform. But after Tucson, I went to Montgomery, Alabama for Air Command and Staff College, and I graduated as a distinguished graduate there. And that's a hard school to get into. It's like 10% can get in, so it's very competitive. And it sort of got me on a very good fast track.
So are you flying at this point?
Not at school, but I was before that in Tucson. My next assignment was back to Omaha, and I was flying in the 55th Wing in the RC-135, which is a signals intelligence platform. So we do collection on other bad people. And I was a major at that point.
You're not a colonel yet, okay.
And then I got promoted 2 years early to lieutenant colonel at Offutt. And then I got reassigned to Tucson.
What do you mean 2 years early? What do you mean by that?
Well, I got promoted 2 years before most people get promoted at lieutenant colonel.
Okay.
And so it's about 3% of every year group gets promoted early. So in other words, so I was in the 3% cut for getting promoted early. And I got sent back to Tucson. I was a squadron commander, so I commanded 365.
I know we're talking military. In between here somewhere, are you meeting anybody? Are you dating anybody? Are you getting married?
I met my wife right before I joined the military.
Oh, okay.
And so she's been with me the whole time. And I ended up with 2 kids, then we adopted 2 in this whole process. I was a lieutenant colonel in Tucson. I went to National War College, made colonel, and then I went to the Pentagon for a bit, and then I went back to Tucson, where I ran 5 squadrons as a colonel.
So all these places, are you being sent or are you choosing some of them?
Most of them, they tell you what to do. Then when I was in Tucson as a colonel, I got sent to Iraq to work for General Petraeus. And so I was a colonel there, spent a year in Iraq, and then I got sent to Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, and I was made the wing commander. So I was the base commander, and I was the mayor of 55,000, and I made general out of that.
Okay, slow down a minute. You're a mayor of what? 55,000? What does that mean?
55,000 people. I was like the acting mayor at Ramstein, Kaiserslautern military community. But I was the base commander at Ramstein.
So you're the base commander and the mayor?
Well, I was like the mayor, equivalent of a mayor,
Okay.
overseeing or taking care of 55,000 Americans that were living there. I was the installation commander for all that. And I would go to, so I was treated as the mayor with all the local mayors. So I'd hang out with the German mayors.
So your political career started kind of almost accidentally?
Well, I learned about how to, get the snow off the roads and get the trash picked up. Right?
That's an important task.
You got to run a city, right? And actually, I had 4 bases I oversaw. But from there I made general, and I went back to Offutt, became the base commander at Offutt.
What was the process of becoming general? Is that a choice, or did you just happen?
It's a choice to stay in, it's a choice to be competitive, but a lot of it's if you have good bosses that have helped you out, and it's very competitive. 1% of your colonels every year make general, just put in perspective.
Okay.
So you take all your colonels, about 1% will make general, and every year, so it's
How many colonels do you think there are?
if I got to remember right, there's about, I got to try to remember this right, it was about 3,000.
Okay.
And so about 30 people make general a year.
Yeah.
So it's a really hard cut. I sort of knew I was competitive because I was a base commander twice now, or once, excuse me, before I made general.
Yeah.
And then I had a joint job. A joint means where you're working with the Army, Marines, and so that's a requirement to make general. And I had all the right schools, and so I knew it was probably in the top 3% of my colonels, just on paper because of being a base commander, but only 1% makes it. So I wasn't guaranteed to making it at Ramstein, and it was.
What's the percentage of generals moving up, becoming 2-star, 3-star, and so on?
Half of your 1-stars make 2-star.
Okay.
And then it's very selective to 3 and 4 stars. It gets really small. And I was still eligible for a 2nd star, but I really did not like the Pentagon. I was in the Pentagon after being at Offutt, and I didn't like the culture, and I just felt like if you're not having fun, it's time to get out. And
what part of the culture didn't you like at the Pentagon? For those, I've been inside the Pentagon twice, but that doesn't tell me anything about.
I'll give you an example. A lot of the civilian, and I don't want to pick on all civilian senior leadership because there's many good ones, but I found a lot of arrogance. And I was in charge of 55 people. I went from commanding 8,000 at Offutt to now I got 55. I had 4 other civilian 1-stars, and I had a deputy that I thought was mean to the colonels. And I finally just said, "Hey, stop it, man. Don't talk to the colonels this way. They served Williams 27, 28 years."
You say, back up before I forget, when you say civilian 1-stars, these are 1-stars that retired and are now civilians?
No, they're like given a civilian equivalent rank of a 1-star.
Okay.
They're called SES,
Okay.
Senior Executive Service. So they're like an equivalent of a 1-star in civilian grade.
Okay.
But I thought the one guy in particular was being obnoxious to the colonels. And I told him, please stop. I want people to like what they're doing here. They want to be treated respectfully. And he sort of told me, I'm going to outlast you here. And I really work for your 3-star boss. And I go, well, you do now. He goes, what do you mean by that? You don't work for me no more. You work for him.
Okay.
And he says, well, you can't do that. I just did. And I called another guy in and said, you're now my deputy. But I felt like that was the spirit in the Pentagon. I didn't
So you
like
went
it.
from 55,000
No. Okay,
over in
as a mayor.
Afghanistan,
Yeah.
as a mayor, to 8,000 at Offutt to now 55. I want to make
Right.
sure I understand the transitions.
But at
Transitions.
Ramstein, I served this community, but only 7,000 direct reported to me at Ramstein.
Only
but
7,000 directly reported to you?
but I had
Only 7,000. That's like.
But the 55,000, my job was to take care of 55,000, all the care and feeding, the power, the snow. That's the community I oversaw.
Wow.
I enjoyed that. That was fun. Pentagon, I didn't enjoy.
When did you leave the Pentagon? What year?
2014. It was interesting to talk about the spiritual part here. I had 4 guys were killed in Afghanistan, and I was sent to investigate what happened. And so I was investigating, and I had about a month and a half working long days. But at night I'd be praying, You're like, God, I don't really enjoy the Pentagon. What do you got in store for me? And I felt the Lord tell me, Don, you fulfilled your mission in the Air Force. I have something new for you. And I thought it was probably in politics because that was an interest of mine. But I really felt the Lord's Spirit leading me, Don, it's time to get out. You've topped out here. So I went back after I had to brief four people died. I had to brief all their moms and dads and spouses. And when I got back to the Pentagon, I told my 3-star boss that I felt like the Lord was leading me to retire. And so I put my resignation in, and he let me retire. He could have
You actually use that language. You feel like the Lord is leading you to do that. So it wasn't, because that's an important. This show is about directions. That's an important directional statement.
Yeah.
Okay, you're not going to hear that from every person.
No, and I was after a lot of prayer. So then I retired on 1 November 2014, right before the election of Lee Terry and Brad Ashford. And as I was getting ready to retire, I called Lee Terry and I go, Lee, can I help you campaign for the last week? Because I knew him, I was commander here. And so I was out doing door to door. I gave a speech for him. I always thought he was going to win. And by the way, Brad Ashford and I became friends over time.
No, I know that.
But
I know his commercials, and I met with Brad personally too. I have another story, but then I just saw, is his wife's name Ann?
Ann, yes.
I just saw the commercial the other night. So. Yeah.
But I gave speeches for Lee Terry, and I was working. And a week and a half later, the election happens, and Lee loses. And I never thought about running for Congress, right? I just assumed Lee was going to win again. He'd been in 16 years. I was just trying to fit in and figure out how I can be part of the team.
All right.
Long story short, I ended up becoming the nominee in 2016.
All right. And there's a lot of similarities between, and you met him, or maybe you have, maybe I don't. He was at our wedding, Sam Brownback. I mean, it's amazing. He has 2 kids. He has 2 adopted kids. It's interesting that you have that. He was in Congress running for president, and John McCain came out, but then lost to Obama. But as a result of that, then he left, not Congress, the Senate, and then he went and became the governor of Kansas. But directional changes, where you think you're going somewhere and then it changes, brings a new change to your life.
So God will open doors and shut doors, and I think sometimes when you lose, it actually opens a door that you would not have had. So I think about Abraham Lincoln. He lost the Senate race in 1858. If that didn't happen, he wouldn't be president in 1816. Right? And I can look at Ronald Reagan. He ran in 1976, lost to Gerald Ford, became the president in 1980. Sometimes a loss is preparing you for the next win.
I think it's John Maxwell has a book out calling Failing Forward. I don't know if you ever read that, but
I've not. I have a lot of his books.
But it's talking about failing and something, but it propels you forward rather than backwards.
Right.
Yeah. So
sometimes a loss prepares you for something bigger, and I've known that. I try to acknowledge that ultimately God's in charge. In my military career, I wanted to be a weapons school guy, which is like the Navy Top Gun. But when I volunteered to do that, I was made an aide to a commander, which is not what I wanted to do. But that was God's plan. My plan wouldn't have been as good.
Now, when did you move to the area? What part of your career were you here with your wife, Angie, and stuff?
So I got married before joining the Air Force. So in 1986 to 1990, I was a lieutenant here. Came back in 98 to 2000. I was a major. And then I came back in 2011 and 12 as a 1-star brigadier general. And then we retired in 2014 and came back.
Okay. And when you were in charge at Offutt, what was your role? The whole wing? Or?
Wing commander, yeah. So here I supervised 8,000 people directly. But we had a community that was probably around 15,000. When you put in a STRATCOM, the weather, you got families on base. And but unlike an international base, you don't have quite the purview of the families, right? Because they're living on the community. When you're the commander overseas, you're sort of very cognizant of all the families and the schools, because you're.
So all these people, do they have access to you, or just through the ranks?
There's ways, through the chain of command. But I'm always been pretty open. There's always ways to communicate with me. I had hotlines you could call me, but I only worked in my office an hour or two a day. I would always go out and walk around, and so I was very open. And I like scaring the junior commanders, because if you're out and about talking to their troops, they got to keep sharp.
Well, you're very, like you said, you're open to meeting with people. You met with me. Now, somebody introduced us, and it was just before you were running the first time. Jarrell Roach, and we met at Panera Bread. And I liked you immediately. And Jarrell knew that I was praying with political leaders. I had been asked to do that in 2011.
Yeah.
I had no idea how to do that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And the person, it's a national organization, and they said, how do I do that? I said, we start with the ones you know. And I said, I only know two. And at the time, I knew Hal Dobb and John Ewing. And I
Yeah.
told them, I said, one's Republican, one's Democrat, one's white, one's black. And they said, we'll start with those.
Yeah.
You know, and so it just mushroomed, and I'm still doing it. But
Well, Hal Dobb I just saw him the other night, so he's been a big part of my life. I remember I was a lieutenant here. He was the congressman.
right,
He didn't know me, but I knew who he was.
right, right. I met him as mayor.
Yeah.
He spoke, I heard him speak someplace local, and so I asked for an appointment, and they said, who are you? And I said, I'm a new citizen. And they said, he'll give you 3 minutes. I said, okay, I'll take it. You know, so I drove all the way downtown, went up his office as mayor, and we met for 45 minutes, not
Yeah.
3. And we just bonded immediately. So
Right.
easy guy to get to know. So yeah.
Yeah, he's a decision maker, and he doesn't waste time making a decision. He sees the facts.
Right.
He decides and moves out. That's my take on Hal Dobb.
All right. So we have like 5.5 minutes left. Tell us how you transitioned into politics and what you've been doing.
Well, I think the good thing about the military, it's helped me be really good on the Armed Services Committee. So I've been I'm rated the most effective guy on the Armed Services Committee for getting things in the defense bill. And because I understand nuclear weapons, I understand bombers, I understand ICBMs, I understand Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. I've studied them my whole adult life. So I think that's really helped me. It's given me a platform to get things done. I'm also on the Ag
Maybe
Committee.
you should be president if you understand them so well.
I won't say, I'll let other people say that, but I feel like I've had a lot of impact in the national security realm, and I like doing that. I'm also the Baltic Security Chairman for the 3 countries in the Baltics, so I work a lot of issues there. I'm the Foster Care Caucus Chairman, so I like working the foster care issues. And make a long story short, I've been able to get 30 bills signed into law, and I have another 10 out of the House this Congress. I haven't made it through the Senate yet. I think I'll get about 8 done in the lame duck session. I like getting things done, and the big thing for me in the local area, I brought in $5 billion in infrastructure to this district. Repairing Offutt after the flood, repairing Ashland after the floods, a new runway, 2 new runways now. Got one at Wahoo. We got, our airport is going to be renovated for the first time in 40 years. It's going to be an international airport.
Although when I watch the videos, and I fly so often, and it changes every 2 weeks. I'm there. It's like,
Well, they're building.
but it says on the video it's going to take 4 or 5 more years.
Right?
Right?
Well, by the time they get the international airport in with the passports, it's going to take about 3 years, right? Right now they're putting the canopy up so you don't get rained on or snowed on when you're
Right.
in between the parking lot and the airport. But I brought $70 million to help the airport do this, right? We're going to put in new natural gas pipelines. We got 100-year-old natural gas pipelines. They're crumbling. Sewer infrastructure in Sarpy, emergency communications infrastructure for Saunders. So I feel like I've helped bring in jobs, but needed infrastructure for this area.
Go back. You said something just a minute ago. You got these 8 to 10 bills, and then you said the lame duck session. Explain that.
Well, after we have our election on November 5th, we'll go back for about a month. It's going to be the old guys. We're not the new guys. The old guys don't come in until January 3rd.
Okay.
So we call the lame duck session. It's the last part of that Congress. We already had the election, and the new guys don't come in until January 3rd.
Okay.
So we have like a month where we can get things done.
Okay.
And I think I can get 8 of my 10 bills out of the Senate, I hope. By the time we're done, they'll give me 38 total.
Great. Praise the Lord. So how do you feel about it? How do
The
you feel
election?
No, not the election. How do you feel about your political career versus your military career?
I always wanted to be a guy that was a Christian first, an American second, then a Republican. And that's got me in a little bit of trouble with my party because if I see something not right, I'm not just a loyal, going to just do something I don't think's right. I obviously am conservative because I'm an old Reagan guy, and I obviously lean heavily that direction. But every once in a while, our leadership does something that doesn't make sense, and I feel like they need people like me. I want to be a statesman. I don't want to be a party hack, right? So I feel like in the end, to be rated the most effective Republican in the House the last 3 years, that means something to me.
Yeah.
Because that means I'm working for America. I'm getting things done.
You're how old now? Can you share?
61.
61. What do you envision the future? Next 10 years?
Yeah, I don't know how long I can do elections every 2 years. They're a grind on my body. And we're in a 50-50 district. There's literally, it doesn't favor Republican or Democrat. It's right down the middle. And so to do this every 2 years is hard. And I think I have the advantage right now of this race, but it's a hard race. I mean,
Has anybody ever thought about changing that from 2 to 3 or 4 or
we
something?
take a constitutional amendment
Right,
to do it.
obviously, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been very seriously thought about, but I'm not going to do this forever. I'm hoping God will lead me in the right way, and I think there's a third chapter to my life. I don't know when, I don't know what that chapter is, but there's a third chapter, I believe.
Any aspirations with Department of Defense?
Yes, and that's been bantied about for like 4 or 5 years now, or Secretary of the Air Force, or Secretary in the intelligence area, or in our Secretary of State area. There has been people put feelers out there, and I do believe this: when the president asks you to serve, you should serve.
Yeah.
You need to have good people that are willing to do it, even if you don't like that president necessarily, or don't agree with the president. When a president asks you to serve, the country needs good people to step up and do it.
So we have exactly a minute left. Look at this camera right here and tell anybody that's watching and is thinking about politics or the military, give them some advice.
Well, have your moral compass first. I mean, it's all about, we have eternity and we have an almighty God, and we can never take our eyes off of that we're Christians first and followers of God. And God's got a plan for all of us. If it's a plan for you to be in politics or, in the administration in some way, if you got a passion for that, do it. But I believe in whatever we do, we have to have the golden rule. And the verses that make a lot of difference to me right now is the fruits of the Spirit. I see so many people calling themselves Christian, but they're full of hate and anger. And it's not the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, and faithfulness. Those are what I want to define me to the max step possible as a politician, but in anything I do.
Great. That's awesome advice. So thanks for being on my show. God bless you in the election. And thanks for being on Directions today. You've heard it from Congressman Bacon, who's a good friend of mine. And you've been such a blessing in so many areas. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And tune in next time for our next show. Thanks so much, and God bless you. Bye-bye.